Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
A premiership helmet has gone to North Melbourne. Yeah, the helmets are uniting. Tristan Cherry has a bro. Caleb Daniel is now a part of the North Melbourne Football Club. How important of a move is this going to be for Caleb and for North Melbourne? Do the Dogs lose out on this trade? And from a fantasy football perspective, in AFL Fantasy, SuperCoach, Dream Team and Keeper, have we got one of the biggest player movement wins for us of this 2024 AFL trade and free agency period? We are going to discuss all of that and more on this latest episode as we get towards the pointy end of our player reviews of all the players that have moved clubs this trade and free agency period. It's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I do hope you're enjoying this series. If you are, maybe you're new to the channel and just discovered us through the trade period, make sure if you haven't already given us a 5-star rating and a follow over on the audio podcast platforms and also at YouTube. You can subscribe, like the channel, turn notifications on. There is plenty of content dropping still throughout the off season as we prepare for your fantasy footy year heading into 2025. You probably don't need too much of an explanation from me about what Caleb Daniel is like as a player. Of all of the players that move clubs this off-season and through the trade period, he's probably one of the most well-known players. Been in the league for a better part of a decade now and has really found himself a home more recently across that halfback, all-Australian caliber player, where his sharp penetrating 30 to 45 metre on the angle kicks have really been a hallmark of setting up the play for the Western Bulldogs for a long period of time. Maybe not so much this year. We'll talk about what and why in a moment. But at his best, Caleb's one of the most elite, sharp, short kicks in the AFL. He doesn't try to take off too much and take on too much. He knows his capacity and his limits, and he does that. Really smart footballer, high IQ, good user of the ball by hand and by foot, and a premiership player with some leadership abilities about him. So a really nice player. What does this do for the Bulldogs? Nothing's probably harsh of a term, given he played 15 games for them this year and up until this 2024 season had been just a strong piece of their side, not just going back to that premiership year of 2016, but even that grand final season where they ultimately lost to the Demons. He was pretty close to heading to Norm Smith territory had the Dogs been able to continue on in that latter third of the game. He's been a playmaker off half-back, but this year he fell out of favour for inexplainable reasons that publicly has not come out yet. Luke Beveridge just moved past him from the back line. They much more preferred the ball movement of others through the back line. And as a result, Daniel found himself a little bit positionless at times through this year. It's why he was subbed so often. Of the 15 games he played this year, 8 of them were sub-affected with either a green or a red vest. And so he found himself bit playing, little bits of small forward, little bits of high half forward link up role, little bits of wing, and at times in game, not very often, but at times rebounding off the halfback, albeit so slightly. So he was a little bit of just a utility for the Bulldogs this year. And his departure alone, while there are others that have left the club and others that have landed, I just don't feel like the Bulldogs feel like they're losing out here. They've had great competition for spots from youngsters underneath, and that's really why Caleb, for portions of the season, especially in the front half, was fighting for regular game time, let alone just to get into the starting and selected squads. So I don't think there's a loss here for the Bulldogs. A little bit of depth, a little bit of experience, a little bit of helped coverage across your flanks and wings, but I don't feel like this hurts them. For North Melbourne, this could be huge. One of the appeals for him and for what North Melbourne were wanting is they were looking to bring in leaders that were capable of sitting in every different line of the ground and leaders that carry premiership experience. And you could argue now with Daniel, they've completed the trio of that. Jack Darling, pressure, presence, goal-scoring option, and a premiership player in the forward line. Luke Parker, while maybe not an exclusive midfielder, pressure, presence, experience, premiership player through the midfield. And now Caleb Daniel sitting in that back line, really completing that trifecta for them.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Caleb Daniels' managers come out and stated he's going to play through that halfback line. Now, whether or not that's the case, we will discover over the off-season and through the pre-season. But I think it is a fairly safe assumption, given what they've done with players like Constanti, to play a pressure forward role, the other forwards that they have sitting in this space. It does feel like the most likely position, and where we have seen Caleb play at all Australian caliber level, is across the halfback. So that makes the most sense to me. It enables some other movement and options for them. Does he leapfrog over and above a Zach Fisher, who, while probably offers a little bit more from a run and carry and speed, definitely is not the elite sharp ball user that Daniel is over a small meterage. He's not really that. Does it free up Colby McKercher, who they've experimented with and developed across halfback? Are they now able to bring him up across the wing and get his elite skills and his athleticism and high aerobic capacity now on the wing, and now helping him to be a higher transition scorer and player up the ground and bringing better ball use through that midfield group inside forward 50? That could be the option as well. To me, if I was to forecast where he plays, I think he's playing across halfback, and I think he's pushed Zach Fisher out of the side, if I was to be honest. I think McKercher can still float between the wing and the halfback spot. They've got some others that I think they want to keep trialling and experimenting through there. But to me, a Caleb Daniel across halfback looks right, sits right, and whether or not it's a Fisher out, a McKercher up the ground or whatever it is, to me, I do feel like Caleb sits in that spot beautifully. And for us, from a fantasy football perspective, that is the most exciting. He's scored okay across half forward and he's scored across the wing okay, but he comes into 2025 with some significant value for us. I mentioned that he played 15 games last year. 8 of those had a sub-affected game about them, and he averaged, let's just call it a flatline 50 across the formats. It's a 49.9 in SuperCoach and a 50.1 in fantasy. Let's call him a flatline 50. Nothing over 100 across the formats. Didn't even crack the 90 in AFL Fantasy. And yet, if you go back through the last few seasons before this one, in AFL Fantasy, you're looking at averages between 86 to 90, while in SuperCoach, you're looking at seasonal averages of 90 to 93. We are getting here. If he gets back into that plum role across halfback that he has scored so well in, and players such as Fisher, McKercher, Sheasel, Zeeble, Hall over the last 3 to 5 years, let alone most recently just this year alone, all have scored premium outputs in this spot. We are getting here potentially anywhere from 30 right up to 45 points per game of value and upside. This from a classic perspective, with a player that I am forecasting to have forward eligibility, could be one of the most highly owned forwards for us in classic, your salary cap formats for 2025, because the pathway is there and believable. And the good news is, as the preseason rolls through, not just December, but in January, February, in those community series games, you will know if he's playing in this distribution role or if they've chosen to use his transition ball movement in different spots. But if he's off halfback, regardless of whether he's there at the expense of Fisher out of the side or McKercher up the ground, there is, like I said, 30 to 45 points per game of value, depending on the format you're in. And it will make him, if this all clicks, probably the most highly selected forward and one of the most relevant players in the fantasy community next year. And as a result, it'll probably see him get overdrafted on draft day because people will be so desperate for him. Even though he's got such a poor average, people will just leapfrog for it because outside of a Bailey Smith, an Isaac Rankin, a Dylan Moore type, there's not anyone that across formats you go, yes, lock him in for a 90 average. So people will leapfrog to go and get their hands on a Caleb Daniel. Mark my words. If all the path aligns to the way that I think it will align, Caleb Daniel will be one of the most relevant players for us next year, one of the most highly owned players in Classic next year, and could be one of the best forward line options for us in 2025. There's a pathway where he still offers in the midfield on the wings because he's not an inside mid and the high half forward. He could still offer 20 to 25 points per game of value in relatively fantasy-friendly roles, given what he can do. So I don't see him as a bust pick regardless, but for it to really pay off, he's got to sit in that halfback role, which I am forecasting he is going to have in 2025. This is one of the biggest pickups we're going to get next year, and definitely be somebody you should be locking away in your coaches panel notebook right now as a player to own in 2025, should the variables all land. But do you agree or disagree with my take on Caleb Daniel? Will we see the helmets reunite in the midfield? I don't think so. But Cherry and Daniel's going to be fun to watch nonetheless. If you agree with my take on Caleb Daniel or have something different you want to say and you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and let me know what you think Caleb Daniel's role is going to be into this coming season, what he's going to average. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, make sure you give the channel a 5-star review, but get in touch with us across social media and join the conversation about Caleb Daniel. All the details for where you can get in touch with us across TikTok, Instagram, X, and Facebook are in the description of this episode, as well as where you can join our Patreon and get access to some Coaches Panel merch heading into the 2025 preseason. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in on this episode. We're nearly wrapped up this series. If you enjoyed it, thank you so much for checking in with us. If you just need to go back and catch up on the episodes, wherever you're checking out, this one has got all the other players that have moved clubs in the trade and free agency period. We can't wait to be back chatting fantasy footy with you again on this channel real soon.